Okay.
Hello, good morning. It's 7:30-ish. Um, it's still quite early. Hello, welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. I'm David. Martin will be joining us momentarily. And I'm joined by Alex and Stephen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So we've got a few things we were going to talk about. Um, so should we start with winter fuel allowance?
Yeah.
Okay. So that winter fuel allowance, eh? No, more seriously, people probably know the winter fuel allowance was brought in by Gordon Brown some years ago when pensions were only going to be increased by 75p, and so that was brought in, and it was something available to all pensioners. That is now changing, and it's just going to be to pensioners who are in receipt of benefits. Why is that being done?
Well, in my view, I think genuinely, I think that all benefits should be means tested, and like if you've got an amount of money set aside to help people who are elderly and in need, you could focus on the people who need it most. And I think the issue with the winter fuel allowance is that there are lots of pensioners who do need it, but lots who don't as well. And so slinging 200 quid a year or 300 quid a year at people who can otherwise afford it, I don't think has ever been a very good idea, especially when there's working age people who are really suffering. You know, people who are working still on universal credit because they can't make amends. I think it's unfair to give that portion of society special treatment when it's not means tested, because all the other benefits really are means tested. So I think it's a fairly good idea as long as the money is used on helping the people most in need. I think that's a good way of focusing your resources.
I think in principle, right? Like if you think about it in principle of a benefit being means tested, like I'm not opposed to doing that. I think the questions arise in a lot of the debate is around the implementation, what is fair and at what point should you give this benefit to someone, at what point you shouldn't. So for example, in the implementation, like one of the first questions that was, just following the debate was, is everyone who is even entitled to tax credits claiming it at the moment? And there's some estimates that actually tens of thousands of people, pensioners who are entitled to what is currently the tax credits, like are not the pension credits, are not claiming it. So the question is, and I know the government is planning to put some effort into reaching out to people and for them to actually claim what they're entitled to in the first place. But then even if everyone who is entitled to currently will claim it, then the other question is, isn't the amount we have at the moment a bit too low? The amount where people are entitled to still claim it. And then there's the question as well about pensions increases in general. So another thing that was announced by the government was the above inflation pension increase as well. So some people are arguing, well, even if you are losing this payment because the pension is increasing with above inflation, overall you're still a bit better off than you were previously with those two, even if you're losing the payment. Although some people might not agree with that. So I think, as with so many of those policies, I don't disagree in principle that you should means test the benefit. The question is, how is it implementing? Who is it really affecting? Are the levels to which it's set currently fair? And those are, I guess, all questions for debate.
It's always difficult, isn't it, to set arbitrary lines where some people get things and other people don't. That's always a question. We did it similarly with the council tax support scheme, where
Yeah.
we set up a banded scheme, because the issue is sometimes as well at the edge of those schemes, people whose income changes bounce in and out of them, which makes it quite difficult as well. So it's difficult to set it, but I think having some criteria is a sensible thing.
Can I just, from my perspective, first of all, sorry I was a little bit late, but from my perspective, this is about government having to make tough decisions, and you're sitting and looking and thinking, what tough decisions are you going to make? And the reality is that because of how the general election was fought, and because there was the tax triple lock, so no increases in tax, VAT, and in income tax, VAT, and national insurance that were guaranteed. The government is left scrambling around for ideas to raise revenue, and what it comes back to is the decision to support this tax triple lock, because it just leaves government with nowhere to go. When they need to raise taxes, and that's what it comes down to. And I said this, and we said it sort of on coffee, buses, and politics during the general election. That policy does not work, and it does not stand up to scrutiny, and it all comes back to that. And so what we need to be doing is, when it comes to elections going forwards, we need to hold governments and politicians to account when they make that stupid policy. That's the reality, and I don't like the what they've done on the winter fuel allowance, but I understand it, is the way I would say, because tough decisions have to be made, and there is a reality, which is that pensioners in this country are better off now than they ever have been, and that's a truth overall. Sadly, there are some people who this is really going to affect.
I mean, I did think that. I think I saw the pension is going up by £400. The state pension. So it does seem a little bit that the money is being moved from the one to the other. I think the point you made is. Martin, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's sort of all sorts of issues with what people worried about what they can say in an election that won't get them crucified, and then they're tied to really difficult positions in the following parliament. But this is, I think, saving. I think it was £2 billion, and they're given the situation, we're in means testing. It seems fair. I mean, I think, Alex, the point you made about people not getting all the benefits they're entitled to. I mean, this isn't just pensioners. This is across society. I mean, the one lots of people don't know about attendance allowance, which is a really useful one that is relatively easy to get, just to help you basically stay independent in your own home. It's not a huge amount of money, but it can pay for someone to help clean or something like that. Given that or how do you get people to take up the benefits to which they're entitled, is the question I was very long-windedly getting to.
I think you've got to use the intelligence, and this is where government have got to be smart. To me, you've got to use the intelligence you have to try and identify those people that are most likely to not be claiming when they should be. And some of this is about government's data sharing, and there's an issue about how they do that. And I've been involved in this a little bit on the school side, when government agencies are trying to share to make sure that entitlement, as an example, to I forgot what it's called, but the payment that schools get for children of low income backgrounds and stuff, and whatever, and they don't necessarily share data. So, as an example, people that it'll be a combination of factors, but identifying people that are in the lowest council tax band properties is a starting point to start to focus and specifically target and encourage people to claim. As a starting point, and it's about government learning to use data smartly, and understanding that they could and should use data smartly, and share data to make this work, and to specifically target, so the right questions are asked at the right time to the right people, rather than just a blanket campaign to say, please check if you're entitled to pension benefits.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, looking at some numbers, I was looking at some of the fact checks on this, because a lot of untrue things are said either side. I mean, actually, the number is quite sizable in my view. Like, there are there's an estimate of 800,000 pensioners who are not claiming what they're eligible for. So now, like I was looking at the government saying that they will do this pension credit awareness drive to identify households that can benefit and encourage them to apply before, before Christmas. But the question is, I think you do need to look at data and how you use data across departments to be able to identify people who need it most. Because if you're just doing an awareness campaign, like it was with many other schemes, not only benefits related, then it still doesn't reach some people who don't follow the usual channels of how government tries to reach people on those awareness campaigns. But overall, I think it does have a significant impact because, it does say here in this estimate, there are around 1.3 million households will continue to receive these winter fuel payments, but over around 10 million estimated people will lose the allowance based on what they're currently estimating in those savings as well. I think one of the not necessarily controversial, but one of the points for debate is at what point one should get those pension credits, because currently, of course, that is a pension credit is a means tested benefit, and you are eligible for it if you have an income of less than £218 a week or less than 332 if you have a joint income with a partner. So for a lot of people, they're saying, well, actually, if you are setting it at £218 a week, that's actually quite, well, a relatively low income. Some people disagree. So some people are making the argument that if you're going to take this payment away, you should increase this eligibility. So it should be higher than, let's say, 200 a week. What are your thoughts on that? Would it be a better way to do it, to kind of put this, a higher amount under which you can be eligible for pension credit, and then not have the winter fuel payments for everyone who's above a higher level of earning than current?
I actually think it would simplify the tax system, which is something that we desperately need to do in this country as well. So I think it's probably sensible, but I have to say, in terms of the government targeting people, although I think they can do it if they're smart, I'm a bit cynical about whether they will, because actually, when it comes down to it, this only raises 1.8 billion. And the more effective you make your campaign to get people to claim benefits are entitled, the less you're going to raise from it. And it sort of negates the need or the benefit of doing it in the first place. So I am a bit cynical about whether the government will do it or not, and will do it properly. I don't think they will, but I think something like that raises means tested benefits. Again, the impact in terms of what the government is trying to achieve here, which is fill a black hole in its budget, would be probably significant. So I suspect it's not the sort of thing they'll be looking at.
Yeah, I think as well. I was looking at some of the previous. Actually, someone did the Twitter commentary about like previous times when like governments have considered perhaps means testing it, and the argument seems to be at least that, well, it will cost more to implement cutting this benefit than, or reforming it, than to leave it as it is. And no one has really touched it in the last over a decade because of how it was perceived to be not the most effective way to save money on the budget or generate revenue, because it was thought to cost too much to implement, or do this awareness campaign, make sure people who are eligible do claim it, and then at the end of the day you're left with not a lot of saving, as opposed to making savings on other budgets that were previously considered for efficiencies. However, in this case, I think there's like less and less left in terms of where you could save money in the system, whereas perhaps 10 years ago people were like, well, we're not looking into this because we do have other options. But now you're left with this budget black hole, and you're thinking you have to look at every single area, not only at the ones that are popular.
I mean, there's a question here for me, because obviously this is a starting point in terms of tax rises. It's not an end point. And so what happens next, and where do government go? I mean, they want to give a kickstart to the economy, so they can't really raise business taxes unless it's on the highest earning businesses, and then the amount you raise goes down and down the more the higher you target that. So you're then starting to look at taxes on the wealthy, which I think the very wealthy, I think morally there's a position about the fact that they should pay more than their fair share. But how would government do this? I don't see how they can, and where they go with it. So the answer to the next question, the answer is more austerity, and councils being hit with bigger and bigger cuts again, and councils can't bear it.
No.
They're not capable of it. I'm intrigued by how we deal with this. Or do the government bite the bullet and say, we didn't realise it was this bad, we are going to have to raise income tax by a penny or 2 penny or do something, because the alternative is going to be austerity again.
Yeah, there's part of me that actually wishes they would. I mean, I don't want taxes to be higher, obviously, but I think for the situation we're in as a country, I mean, the other thing is austerity itself has been a drag on growth, that lack of investment.
Yeah.
So, it is it's going to be a difficult sell, but I think it's one that might be necessary. I mean, I suppose the alternative is that we can go around to Mr. Burns' house and just shovel money onto the fires of cold pensioners to keep them warm, but possibly there's a more efficient way of doing it. I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was, and the thing is, this adds to the administrative burden, but they were also putting in another cliff edge, where if you're on the border, you get the money, and if you've got 1 penny more, you don't.
Yeah.
And so
if your income fluctuates, so if you're a pensioner who's still working a bit sometimes, then or you can bounce in and out of it as well, which is sometimes even worse. Well, it's not worse, but yeah.
But I mean, no, I agree. Or you might have a small state pension that takes you less than 400 quid over, and you actually end up losing that. And I think there's more administrative overhead in doing a taper.
I think there are like a lot of situations in between as well. There are also people who are getting like closest to the like lowest band per week. So let's say you get like 218 or a bit below a week, but you have some savings because maybe you work some like part-time or very part-time hours, or like you just have, and obviously all this means testing takes the savings into account. Some people are saying as well, like, well, it's unfair if I have a very small very small amount of savings, but I still won't be eligible for this, whereas I'm still not like better off. It's not like people want to, and you can see from people's personal perspective, if I had just a couple of £1,000 in savings, I don't want to deplete every single penny of my savings before I'm entitled to something that you are entitled for 10 years. Obviously, I understand how people are upset about this. It's not like you're a millionaire and you have like millions of pounds in savings. You have a little bit, and you kind of thought like, well, you have to like spend every single penny of your savings until you're qualifying for a lot of those things. So I think there'll be like lots of people in the middle, but this is unfortunately the case with every single means testing of benefits. So for example, like all my life I was like, even when I was earning like a lower amount, I was just at the you might be eligible, but you're not kind of thing. And you think, 10 years ago, like, oh, that's really unfair, but I never claimed anything because of that. And then you always like look at others like, oh, they're actually better off claiming it than me working. And it can be like a very frustrating feeling sometimes, like, when I was on a lower income and, I thought in my view at that point, it made more sense for people who are on some benefits to not be working than me to be working. I think you hear those stories all the time, and some people do relate to those. So I think you need overall to make it fair, but it is, as David said, I think it's difficult from a implementation point of view to actually make it fair, because you can argue, well, it's not fair for the benefit to be universal either, because there are some people who like really, really don't need it, but then there are lots of people who need it who are, or you can argue who need it, who are in the middle, who wouldn't get it under this proposal.
Yeah. Can I just one other thing on, if there was so Martin, I take your point completely, and I agree with you about a sort of national advertising campaign actually not being that effective, but and the targeted thing being better. Is there a role? So one of the issues that you sometimes come across is people, for reasons, people are proud and don't want to claim benefits. Is there a role for an advertising campaign in normalising it and say actually, lots of people are taking up this benefit to which they're entitled because they've paid in all their lives.
I mean, there's no harm in it. The issue is how much you spend versus how much benefit do people gain from it. You know, that's always the way. And how do you target it? But for me, I'd much rather do something that was much more targeted. You know, and you could mix that message into it, David, potentially. You know, it's, to me, I mentioned it before, but it's about data sharing. My brain started working, and I remember it was what we were trying to do, and it was in children's services. And I bet your bottom dollar the county council are still trying to do this, which is get children to, or parents of children who are entitled to free school meals to claim it. And what I remember from it is that in two-tier councils, the two councils were not allowed to data share. So parents that were claiming benefits, as an example, they weren't allowed to share that data with the county council, and there was a big fight to get it sorted, because then you could target your free school meals allocations, and it's that sort of stuff where we need to make sure government is working together at every level and able to share data, where it's clearly in the best interest of people to know that they are going to be close to or near the threshold to be able to claim winter fuel allowance and potentially other tax benefits and stuff. Claim pension credits. So it's that sort of stuff they need to do, is make sure they've got the ability to be smart, is my view. And then, you know, if you're going to encourage them to claim, part of the message is, listen, plenty of people who are better off than you are claiming. You know, you need to be doing it, and you know, you've earned the right to do it through your life. Absolutely.
The other way of doing it and of making sure people are aware is, I think the district councils do a great job. So if you ever sit on the contact centre and listen to those phone calls, you'll see people ringing up with different issues, and the customer service operative will go through and sometimes note and check that these people aren't claiming what they're allowed to as well. Because none of us really understand it, do we? Or almost none of us understand it. No. And so that's really helpful. So then that's not just district council, telephone, contact centre people. I guess that's all people. It should be all people who contact people's lives, because, you know, quite often it's frontline workers you get to see inside and see where the real need is, and you know, which isn't observable from the outside sometimes.
You know, someone I know works at HTC's call centre. Don't worry, I'm not going to embarrass them. But it's like sometimes the calls are, you know, where's my bin? You know, why hasn't my bin been collected, and so on. And sometimes it's, I haven't got any food. What do I do?
Yeah.
You know, some of them are really difficult calls.
And they do a genuinely great job in trying to help people out, because, you know, if you ring up customer services jobs, quite often it's contact centers. It's like, answer the query you got. Can I help you? Put the phone down. But there's less of that. And so this week at Overview and Scrutiny, we were talking about response times for HTC and telephone line. I think the average wait time at the moment is about 2.5 minutes. And I was saying that's too low, because what we want customer services operatives spending time talking to people, you know, and exploring their cases more than just like bang, bang, bang. So those are big decisions we have to make in the future. But definitely, if you sit with that team, they do an amazing job of making sure that people get what they're entitled to.
Yeah, I think historically the conversation about call centres has been about instant answering and having the people there to answer instantly. And you're right, what you want is people there that are making having the right conversations with people. So I would agree with you, Stephen. Actually, I think focusing on what call centres do is quite important. It always is, though.
I mean,
oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
There's one point linked to this as well, because, you know, linked to this discussion around call centers and in general, like benefits that give like an allowance, like, or a voucher. So like, just to draw a parallel, like the government also extended the household support funds like for another 6 months. It's been announced. We had to see in the council what overall figure that will be. That's something that I was always like, as someone who's like on the committee, like responsible over this, I'm thinking like, is it the best use of those, like, across the country, millions of pounds in household support fund to give vouchers to people rather than like having a different way. So for example, we have some partnerships as well. We have some work with Citizens Advice and with Age UK, which is exactly about that, about like maximizing income, about like sitting down with a person more than 2.5 minutes or whatever it might be, to say, okay, can we identify where in your budget, like, could we make some savings, or could we make things more efficient? And sometimes like some of the charities and organizations working with people can identify, okay, are you on the, is there like a better or a cheaper phone bill you can be on, or like a different electricity provider, and actually making quite a lot of savings for people without affecting their quality of life. And those are things that like people, especially if you're like busy or for whatever reason you can't research those things for yourself, you can like easily like lose out hundreds of pounds every month because you're not on the best like contract possible. So like you might actually make more savings than the £100 voucher you're receiving through a direct voucher system through a thing like household support fund. So that's something that, although like we have done this as a council and we're continuing this extension, probably to do some kind of voucher system. People apply and say, I will need like I need some help with my energy bills or with my food bills or whatever it might be. In long term is not the best way to actually tackle poverty, like in my view, because you are just, it's kind of like a sticking plaster of like, okay, you give a voucher, which is very helpful, for the moment. And in a few months time, you're back to, especially if the issues have like some root causes that are not tackled, like, the situation around housing or like other, perhaps like, people needing more support with skills or employability, then you're back in like the same square one, like 6 months later, or you need another household support funds to again support people. So I think it's very different with free school meals, and like I think that's something I agree, like we should have them for various reasons. But with those kind of direct vouchers, I'm kind of thinking, is this the best impact this central government money can have on reducing poverty and inequality and helping people? And yeah, I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I think I'm pleased it got extended, but I'm not sure in the long term it's the best use of actually like tackling the problems long term.
I mean, but this is the whole thing. It's like, do you do what's best, or do you do what you can actually achieve? Because there's a better way of doing it, but getting that better way of doing it is hard. I suppose you do what you can do in the meantime and try and change it, but it's hard. I thought, can we just pick up a couple of comments from Twitter? One referring to something I said earlier. Simon says pension would have still gone up by £400 even if the winter fuel payments had been kept. Hence why people are losing out overall. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you are right. Fair point. And then from Kerry, there isn't a savings allowance for pension credit, but over 10k will see a deduction on a scale of £1 a week for every £500 over 10k. So there's there is a sort of, I guess that's with reference to the taper I was talking about. But I was thinking sort of a taper the other way, so that you don't either have all of the benefit or none of it. But that does add overhead to things. Shall we move on?
Very happy to move on if we need
Okay,
to.
right. I'll see you all later. Also the thing in my chair is gone, so I keep falling down. So we'll probably talk about this another time at more length, but I just wanted to mention briefly the rail nationalisation bill that's going through. Only as one brief thing, which is that there is, if you go to Burgess Hill or Essex Road, there is still British Rail branding from Network South East. And so that will have outlasted the entire period of privatisation. So that's all I wanted to mention on that. Sectorisation was a good idea. So the next one we were going to talk about was plans for a solar farm, a new solar farm. It's being built in Mordor, or Bedfordshire, as it's also known, but near St Neots. So, Stephen, you're on mute.
Sorry, some of it's over the border, isn't it? Some of it's over the border around kind of Kimbolton way as well, which I always think is quite interesting that they describe that as near St Neots, because I'm sure the people the Huntingdon constituency wouldn't like to be described as that way anymore. But so it does cross over. It's on a similar scale, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of, to the Sonica development, which has been quite controversial in the east of the county, and it's going to go through, I think. And so, yeah, it's a huge scale thing, but most of it's in Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of like the parishes affected, because I know like some of the parish councils have been quite involved when there were like some earlier discussions around this. I think it's yeah, we're looking at like Great Stoughton, Perry, the Perry area, like Hale Weston, like and that kind of part of Huntingdonshire, which will be affected as well.
So the plan, I mean, I had the location a bit wrong. So it's East Park Energy, and it's for a 400 megawatt solar farm and energy storage facility. And it's clean area. The company is Brockwell Storage and Solar, and it's going to be 4 sites based around. I thought it was Bedfordshire because it says it was Purtonall, and there's a National Grid substation in Eton Soken, which used to be a Pokestop as well for people who play Pokemon Go, and that's where it would connect to the national grid. To put it in scale, I'm taking this from the Hunts Post article. 400 megawatts is about 108,000 homes, so more than there are in Bedford. And of course, the way the national grid works, it's not directed to one particular place.
So it's about half the output of Little Barford Power Station,
right,
which is about 750 megawatts.
Cool. So, and it says it's 3-meter high solar panels accompanied by a 12-meter high transformer housed in a container. The farm is going to be spread across 4 sites. Here you're right. Between Purton Hall and Risley, between Keesoe, Little Staunton, between Great Staunton and the River Kim, and then between Great Staunton and Hale Weston. And it's been categorized as a nationally significant infrastructure project, which means it sort of goes through, it doesn't go through the usual planning system, but it's sort of decided more nationally.
There is an element of it where it's decided at county, so those things do go through county council as well, through the county planning system. But the extent to which county can actually stop them is quite small, isn't it?
So I think county are a consultee, though, aren't they? They're not an actual decision maker. Yeah. I mean, there's an issue about NSIP and how it works. That's one thing, but I'm not involved in this site at all. I have to say that, but I have done solar stuff before and public consultation on solar, and I must admit, and this is going to upset anybody that's watching, but the response to solar, which is similar to response to housing, from communities, I find sometimes really difficult, which is the same arguments, and a number of them I struggle to get to grips with. So, a good example is this is taking up valuable farmland. And if you actually look at where farming is going in the next few years, and the next 10 to 20 years, farm yield is going to go up somewhere between about 10 and 20% across the country. There's plenty of capacity for us to build on farmland and to do things like solar to get ourselves so that we're more dependent on sustainable ways of generating fuel. There's plenty enough capacity for us to do those and keep supplying and increase the amount of food we supply as a country to ourselves as well. And so for me, I'm generally speaking, I'm quite a fan of solar, and especially nowadays, they're getting smarter with it, with what they're doing underneath the solar. So, as an example, you can grow crops that have a low sunlight, low need for sunlight. So, big leaf crops like lettuces and stuff like that, you can grow under solar panels. You can use the underneath of solar panels for grazing and stuff like that as well. So, there are, to me, I am quite a fan. I don't know this site specifically, but I just think it's something that needs to happen.
I mean, I have to agree. I do agree with you, Martin. I mean, I've a mate of mine. One of the parishes that's objected is Great Staunton, and a mate of mine is the chair of the parish council. So there is always could it be a bit smaller? We don't want it as close to where we live, and so on. And it's a big development. I get that. If the alternative is fossil fuels, that's not an alternative. And I really do think we need to be going through this. I'm not on across the detail of the NSIP process, but there are times when, so you can see the logic behind there being times when you and something that is nationally important should override local planning concerns. I mean, I'm sure that
But let's be clear.
But you never get anything through otherwise. That's the issue, isn't it? Is that nobody wants it in their backyard?
Yeah, that's the issue. Let's be clear. NSIP process is not there because it needs to be. The NSIP process is there because too much local government on significant projects, too much local government was saying no. That's the reality. That's why NSIP is there. And that's something that and that a lot of the time, I'm sorry councillors, but I'm going to say it, a lot of the time is because councillors all they're doing is it's this thing that I talk about quite a lot: leadership, not followership, not leadership. Too many councillors are listening to all the people that shout very, very loudly and saying that is what has to determine this application, rather than giving weight to the argument those people are making about why something should and shouldn't be approved. Yeah. That's the reality of it. And
the reality is, though, we've all got, if we want to be councillors much longer, you have to get re-elected, and doing things which the local community don't like is difficult, isn't it? That's the way democracy, especially local democracy, is set up. And actually what happens because of that is we've just been through a general election where on similar contentious issues like East-West Rail through this part, most of the candidates wouldn't state a position because they were too scared of losing votes. Yeah. And so that doesn't really help either. And so that's difficult. I agree completely, and I also agree that you have to take these decisions out of the hands of local democracy, because usually local councillors will vote against them. We've seen it at Seneca, we've seen it with the incinerators projects as well, where actually councillors have agreed that they don't want these things in their county, based on Western, but you don't ever get anything if you do that, and so there has to be a high level of decision making somewhere.
Well, I disagree to a certain extent. First of all, I know from history that most of these projects, once they're up and delivered, and there's an issue about how long they take to deliver in terms of the electoral cycle, once they're up and delivered, people just sit and look at it and go, actually, that's nowhere near as bad as I thought. We'll live with it. And a lot of the time, the uproar has an impact of about 3 to 6 months, and then people go back to normality. When you think that most local elections, apart from good councillors get a good incumbency factor when they're up for re-election, because they've done a lot for the communities and stuff like that. But the majority of people in local elections are voting based on what their opinions are of national politics. And so this stuff sort of fades, and what people try to do is they do sometimes try and resurrect it during election campaigns, but that is the reality. But also, in the same way that social media can be a force for bad sometimes around campaigning on this stuff and everything else, councillors have got a greater ability nowadays to put forward a case to explain why and how they vote on certain things, and so that reasonable people will understand it. And too many councillors don't use it.
Yeah, I also think it depends where we are. Like, I think with a lot of those infrastructure and national infrastructure projects or big, housing developments as well, I think it is what the government is doing at the moment is doing a lot of things also very early in the electoral cycle. And I do get some of the things are very unpopular, because otherwise, if you just leave them until late, as we know from council, then you can't do them anymore. For example, now very few things can be done in the last 8 months, because then everyone will be worried about, but there are elections coming up and this and that. So I think you can see how across different levels of government, they do things early in the electoral cycle as opposed to like leaving them until the last minute, which in my view, it's really, I think, I'm not sure how to solve this issue, but there are some issues with the political system in general. Like, when I was like doing the general election campaign, to have been so easy for me to pick up on every single controversial issue and be, I'm against this and that and that. And I didn't do this unless I had a view on this. But I think there's like a kind of like, in a way, in a lot of elections, a playbook of, oh, you're a new like candidate for council. Those are all the 4 controversial housing developments right there in the local area. We're saying we're against all of them, and then like we're winning more votes. And I think that that's wrong unless you actually believe in those things. Like the number of people standing for elections saying things, even if personally they don't believe, just because they think, well, it'll go down well with the voters.
But it's also true that the people that want you to vote against are the only people that are going to speak. And
Yeah,
that's something
true.
you have to understand as well. And a lot of councillors, they're looking over the shoulders at and at the people that are shouting at them and telling them to vote against and everything else. And what they're not doing is listening to the people, or trying to understand who are the people that are staying silent. They're not necessarily people that, a lot of them are people that are ambivalent. But a lot of them are people that will sit there and think, I'm supporting it, but listen to those guys that are opposing it. I'm not going to stand up against those and say this is a good idea, because they don't think it's in their interest to do so. And the councillor has a role to make sure that they're standing up for those people as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, back to just to say like on the detail of this, I mean, I have looked a bit into it because it was at the time of like a few months ago. It was quite early stages in the general election time, like maybe 6 or 7 months ago when this came up. Like, I do think there are like some questions, of course, that are put by local parish councils, so on, around the size, around like how useful it would be for the area, around the impact on, I mean, those arguments on impact on farms. I think I agree with Martin on this, and like overall, I can't help but think that, well, overall and it's quite shocking. Overall in the world, we waste like a third of the food we produce. It's similar in the UK. Like I do also think that we can produce like whilst having those renewable energy sources, but like people who are saying like, well, we'll run out of food because we are building like a wind farm or a solar farm. Maybe we should look at how we're actually using the food first of all that we're already producing, because we're wasting a lot of it as well. Like. Yeah,
a really good way of using less land for farming is not to eat animal products.
That will be a controversial discussion.
We'd have to run the maths on that, wouldn't we? Because I think that's only true if you consider grade 1 agricultural land, which is good for crops. Yeah, there's lots of sheep and goats and cows that live in meadows which are not viable for crops. So let's not go into that one.
I just want to, because I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about it, but this issue about crop yields is really important, and where farming is going. And what they're starting to use and understand is technology. So some of it is about GM foods and what GM foods does, but some of it is about understanding specifically how do you target water at areas of fields, as an example, that need water when the whole field doesn't, as an example. How do you plant crops so that you maximize the way that they benefit from sunlight? And this is all using science to get to understand exactly how you get more out of a field, and a bigger crop yield out of a field than you do now. And all that technology is evolving and changing all the time. It's actually the is it Plant Breeding Institute, I think, in I've forgotten the name of it, in Cambridge, is one of the organizations that sort of leads on it, and it has a knock-on benefit as well. The better and better we get at this, the better and better we get at producing crops and enabling the third world to generate their own crops as well, and provide their own crop. It's really, really important stuff. And like a lot of our industry, UK farming is not as productive as a lot of its competitors. Israel apparently are fantastic at this, so are America at maximizing crop yields. So there's enough space for us to do this. It's absolutely clear to me, that argument doesn't wash. But the other thing about solar, there's two things. Why is solar being put in here? Why here? And that is always about access to the grid, because the most expensive part of all of this is how you get the energy you're creating into the grid.
Yeah.
Which you'll see from the St Ives Park and Ride that County Council have been building has been finished for about 9 months to a year. But they're only just taking down the cladding now because they can't get a grid connection, because it's not too expensive. The delays in doing it are too high, and so that's a massive issue for solar. And you're exactly right on that.
Yeah, no, that is a huge issue. But the other thing that's related, sorry, I'm ranting now, but the other thing that's related to it is doing something that allows local people to benefit from it, from reduced fuel prices or something like that. So if you are going to be directly impacted by a solar farm, then you need to be allowing the people that are directly impacted to benefit in terms of lower fuel prices. There you go. That's my rant over.
Can I rant about one thing before we move on? So the other big issue that we haven't talked about, of course, is that the electricity that we're using to run this podcast, in which we're looking, our lights are on, our computers are on, is mostly coming probably from Little Barford Power Station, which has got 2 huge gas turbines. So we're talking about 400 megawatts at the new solar plant. Little Barford churns out about 750 megawatts. To do that by burning gas, there's some fairly well established calculations says that power station kills 13 people a year from breathing difficulties, on average, not actually that, but in order to burn that much gas, kills 13 people a year, from things like breathing difficulties from the pollution, the nitrous oxide, and of course the extraction of gas is also not risk-free. And so solar basically kills no one, and the solution probably shouldn't be solar or wind. It should be better investment in nuclear power, which would take all of this, because nuclear power, if you look at the per terawatt hour fatalities and casualties, is as low as solar and wind as well. And so because we won't take the difficult decision to invest in our new nuclear fleet, I know we're building Hinkley C at the moment, it's massively over budget and takes too long, but actually nuclear is part of the solution. But you have to say that it costs people's lives burning gas in power stations. So even if you don't believe in a climate emergency, pollution is definitely a thing.
How about flooding though? Because one of the concerns, I just speaking about like what the residents in the area have been saying, were, well, would there be increased flooding risk from building this, for example, on the roads going from St Neots to Great Stoughton, for example, or that kind of area? Do we think it will have any impact building this on flooding in the area, or likelihood risk of?
I don't know why it would, apart from lack of vegetation, but agricultural fields aren't particularly good at sequestering water, are they? You have to have good plant. I don't know. I can't imagine why it would be the case.
Yeah, I don't know either. There's something that's been raised, like would there be increased risk of flooding with those?
I've never heard of flooding being an issue with solar either. I must admit, but that's a new one on me. And I'd say I've dealt with a few solar farms. There's the other thing. Battery storage is really important as well in terms of what that's doing for solar, because that allows us to benefit from solar when the sun's not shining, as people say. Although it is worth saying that solar generates electricity at much lower levels of sunlight than people imagine.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again, and also about at some point we should do an episode specifically on the planning system, and for people who really need to be put to sleep.
I'll go in the proper rant mode if you do that. I'll tell you.
Yeah. No, it would be no. I'd like that actually. I mean, but also there's a lot that needs to go there. But talking about the planning system, the local plan update. So Huntingdonshire District Council is going through the process of updating its local plan. So I think the first question to ask is, what's a local plan?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay, all right. Shall we?
Yes, you have. So basically, it's the plan for development in. So one of the things that the local authority has to do is deliver a sustainable supply of housing and other things. And so we're required by government. I think in Huntingdonshire, it was about 900 properties a year, 950 properties a year. We have to deliver, and if you don't do that, you go into something called tilted balance, which becomes very difficult to reject planning applications. You lose your power to oppose things. And so this is basically, you know, at a very simple level, putting forward the plan up until 2050 for bringing forward sites for development. So if you look where I live in Loves Farm, went through this process. I think Winchringham didn't, because I think it happened in between local plans. So you do this, and this is the big opportunity for a local authority to set its ambition about where it builds houses, what type of houses it wants to build, what sort of infrastructure we need to build about, and what sort of commercial retail development we need, or commercial and retail developments we need to build around it. So we don't just want to build houses, we want to build communities, thriving communities with jobs, local jobs as well. And so this is the opportunity. And the first stage in that process is that the council is legally obliged to put out a call for sites, so that anybody's got a parcel of land that thinks might be suitable for development puts out applies, puts their land forward. And what we're going through at the moment is the process of sorting through all those applications for pieces of land, filtering some out because they're not feasible for various reasons, you know, sustainability being one of them, flood risk being another. And we're down to kind of a long list at the moment. The reports to HTC's Overview and Scrutiny Committee were, I think, over 3,000 pages. And I think members had 8 days, 3,500. Members had 8 days to read 3,500 pages of papers, which is actually physically impossible to do, I think, unless you dedicate every waking moment of it. But so this is going to go to consultation. So we're basically approving this long list. Cabinet's going to approve it next week, and after that, it will go out to public consultation. I think the thing is the public probably won't be interested in reading all 3,500 pages, because they're going to be interested in the places around their communities, and so it's split up geographically, which makes it a bit easier. But it's an interesting process, and it's taken a lot of work to get here, and it's something we have to do. And it's as a local authority, where you as an administration where you got 4 years possibly, this is one of the ways you can. It's one of our legacies for the future, because we can set up a greener, more sustainable, healthier, happier Huntingdonshire by working out where we're going to build the houses, and we have to build some somewhere.
So have you read the 3,000 pages, Stephen?
No, I've looked through the pages, which for the communities that I represent, basically. I mean, to be fair, I will have to have a better look this weekend, because it's coming in front of Cabinet this weekend. But the difficulty I have is that we tell councillors, like, oh, you don't have to read all 3,500 pages. Yeah, because the local plan advisory group, which is another committee of councillors, has already done that. But then there's a democratic deficit there, or scrutinising deficit there, is if you don't read things. And if some people say to you, the discussion, don't have to read all of it. It was a joke at the meeting. Well, if you don't have to read all of it, which bits don't you read? It's a difficult decision. So it's more of a technical document, I think, which is a reference for everybody. But it's been a bit of a struggle for the people on those committees, and one that I will probably face this weekend as I try and demolish as much of it as I possibly can.
It is difficult. I mean, me and Stephen unwittingly ended up sat next to each other at the scrutiny meeting last week, because I was there on a professional basis, and I have to say, I actually thought, with the odd exception, the scrutiny committee was really good. I've seen those meetings, where what the councillors do is just bury themselves in the local issues that matter to them, and find out ways of using scrutiny to actually oppose individual developments. And actually, as a whole, that scrutiny committee was very, very focused on the process, on making sure the questions and the consultation was right. And I thought they did actually a good job. That's the reality. There was one exception, but I'm not going to mention that. But in general,
one councillor called out the whole process and the integrity of the officers who put it together, which I think was particularly unfair.
Yeah,
there was no support from any other councillor.
No, absolutely. I thought it was it was really good, and there's a reality, which is that there's a couple of unknowns. One of which is some sort of serious infrastructure issues that Combined Authority are doing some strategic stuff on at the moment. And how they impact, and that's where I think it gets a bit difficult, because a lot of the stuff that's coming forward is dependent on infrastructure improvements that aren't necessarily decided yet, and that has to be worked through. But actually, I do think it's Huntingdonshire accepting that it's a growth authority. But also, and this point was made at the meeting, housing numbers in Huntingdonshire are likely, you know, the housing requirement is likely to go up as part of the consultation that's going on at the moment. But the number of sites that have come forward mean that there's an element of flexibility. So if they need to flex the numbers up as the local plan process continues, they can do it. And I think that's a good thing. And it shows that Huntingdonshire is in quite a healthy position, to be honest. They're not scrabbling around looking for sites and without enough sites to come forward. And I think that's a good thing.
I'm glad that apart from one council who sort of dug themselves into a bit of a hole, that the scrutiny thing went well. You know, that's good. But there is, the thing is, this is, I mean, it's a document that once in place, lasts for a long time. There's a whole process before it, but also it has, you know, it does have a real effect on the planning system, you know, on the planning, because it is setting out, you know, the local plan becomes part of the effectively planning law for the area it covers.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's also the neighbourhood plans that sit underneath that. You know, Huntingdon Town Council has a neighbourhood plan. We're starting to look at doing that because ours is running out. But there's this difficult situation where we're also expecting changes to planning law, and you've got this sort of complicated thing where you've got one bit of local government wanting to do something, but it's dependent on something else, and who knows what's going to happen when, and all the rest of it. So that's it does make it very difficult to do that. I think
that's part of the reason why I would make the local plan process more strategic. I would like to see a county-wide local plan effectively. Just because it allows you to take a better picture of where the county is going as a whole, and actually you can let the whole county evolve through a local plan if you get it right. And I know that would be unpopular amongst many, but I think it would allow some of those strategic things that are going on to be visibly connected in the thinking. From a personal perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the other issue, of course, is that it's even county level. It's across borders. So, you know, sat in St Neots with talks of 350,000 houses being built like 6 miles away at Thamesford, are frightening and don't play any part in this local plan because of somebody else's, another or local authorities.
Well, they sort of do because if 350,000 homes were going to be built in Thamesford, then that would have an impact on the housing requirement if there was a real substantial and clearly identified sort of policy to say that housing development is going to come forward. It would have an impact because you could it would satisfy some of Huntingdonshire's unmet need and it would reduce the housing needed in Huntingdonshire. But that scheme is, I think we talked about it before, but it's basically think tank coming forward with a glorious idea
with a silly number. But there will be houses if East West Rail is built. There will be houses, and then there was Adam Zerny, who's a Bedfordshire councillor, was ranting about it in the local press this week, saying he's kind of opposed to it as well. So, like, you know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we don't democratically, and we don't have much influence of what happens across borders, like you say, and even in Cambridgeshire, in South Cambs as well. So there's lots going to be going on with Cambridge, lots going to be going on with EWR, and that will obviously impact what's going to happen.
I mean, there are developments that are on the there are developments that are on the border with South Cambs and with South Cambs, developments between Yaxley and Peterborough, and that cross over, where they're really close to the boundary, and you do have to consider the boundary impact on that stuff.
I mean, there's that's always going to be a problem though with any border, any boundary. If you do, wherever you draw them, if you're doing, there is a bit that is at the edge of a boundary, at the edge of an area that will affect what's going on in the next area. Yeah. And
really unlucky, you get a planning application that crosses borders, and they're really interesting.
Yeah, I bet. So it's the local plan. What's happening next with the local plan?
So it's going to go to cabinet on Tuesday night. Is it Tuesday night? This week it's going to cabinet, And I guess after that, it will be open to consultation, which means we have to really encourage everybody to respond to that for the bits around their community, because it's your first big chance of having an impact on what happens and which bits of lands are going to be developed. And you can't really do that without local knowledge. It's difficult to do that looking at maps in a local plan, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, one of the things I would say is I would encourage anybody, whether they support or oppose, and this is really important, you know, if you're supporting a site or whatever, just take part in a consultation. And again, you know, the compliment that Huntingdonshire is due is they seem to be working really hard at the comms elements of the local plan to make sure people are aware of it, and to try and you know, maximize the knowledge of it so people take part. So as an example, one of the things they were talking about is first of all, face-to-face meetings about the local plan in libraries and stuff like that, which is important, but also advertising it on bin lorries and stuff like that, just really making sure that as much as you can, and that's a big qualification, you're raising awareness of the fact that the local plan process is taking place, because it's actually the most important thing in terms of planning that a local authority does.
Well, yeah, because I mean, all of the planning decisions that are later made by the planning committee, development management, have to align obviously with national planning law, but also with the local plan.
Absolutely, but it also in terms of getting it right. The point Stephen made about the tilted balance is important as well. If you don't get your local plan right, and as an example, an important housing site is not delivered for you know, for 10 years, you start getting into this tilted balance thing. So making sure these sites are deliverable and will be delivered within the local plan period is really, really important.
And effectively, the tilted balance means, like, if you have the plan and you do it, you get to choose more where these go. If you're operating under tilted balance, you have much less control over that.
The council has to demonstrate that it is able to provide the housing it needs for the next 5 years. So it's got to have 5 years worth of housing land supply. And if it can't do that, which effectively is a failure of the local plan for whatever reason, then what happens is that there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development anywhere. So rather than having a document that says this in principle is where the housing delivery is going to happen around Huntingdonshire or wherever, it basically becomes an open game.
Yeah. And that's difficult. So I mean we've been on for about an hour. We've covered a few things. Is anybody else wants to bring up?
I'm just waiting for the consultation. I think it's the first ever time after 3 years and plus in local politics when I will complete such a thing. And I think that's the issue, because like so far, like every single area I lived like obviously in Brighton, in London, like in Cambridge, like now, you know, in Huntingdon. And every single time I got those letters about local plans or developments, I always saw like, this is not the place where I will like stay forever. Like, why should I be involved without understanding, you know, I can still have a view about development, even if I'm like renting or like a few years in the area. And now that I bought a house, now I'm like, I'm going to fit in every single consultation. But I think that's one of the issues why we're already struggling with younger people and people in private rent to respond to those, because I think unless you have this sense of like, oh, I bought somewhere, now I have like a stake in the area, I think people are less inclined to have their views, even if they have very good points and, you know, they can have views about what should happen to a local area. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I think we should probably wrap up there. Sometimes we do favorite buses of the week. I've not actually taken a bus this week because I've been more or less static. I've been more or less sat right here. Martin?
I haven't taken a bus, but my favourite bus of the week is the one that's going to take me from concert to the start of the Great North Run on Sunday.
The one that you're getting a bus back. That's the one you need to get on, mate. Because when your legs are gone, you don't want to be queuing for the metro.
But the bus will go from the Great North Run to the railway station and then home. So that bit's easy. The other one's the more difficult bit, to be honest, getting to the start, because it gets a bit congested around Newcastle on Great North Run Day.
Have you done it before?
Twice, yeah. Yeah.
So you know that the bit that falls first timers is when you run down the little hill towards the seafront and you think you're done, and the thing you can see is like another mile to go, isn't it? And you have to.
That mile,
and if the wind is going along is against you on that bit, it's a killer.
it is a killer, but actually that last mile is absolutely glorious as well. I do like it, and the housing estates you go through just before you do that left turn are fantastic. The people are amazing.
And you can get beer as you're running along. People will hand out beer sometimes, won't they, as well?
Beer, it's basically beer and jelly babies, and if it's really hot, people spray water over you and all sorts.
Have a lovely time.
Okay. Well,
one thing on buses, bus of the week. I mean, I mentioned like actually probably one of my favorite routes is the park and ride, like St. Ives to Cambridge. I know some people are saying like, yeah, sometimes delayed or it's full in the morning. Like I've experienced that as well. But like overall, I think it's one of the more reliable buses in the county. And I do quite like the busway. But actually Stagecoach announced, and I will like be able to check it from next week to see if it's true, that they're planning to provide up to a 10-minute frequency along the northern track between St. Ives Park and Ride and Cambridge City Centre. So that's from Sunday. The article was published 3 days ago. So we'll see if that is improving even more next week. But overall, I think what I noticed, because I use now like Park and Ride quite a lot, like also the Cambridge ones, is actually the Park and Ride services to Cambridge City Centre have improved compared to how it was like, a year, 2 years ago. So yeah, I think there's actually real potential to make park and rides like transport hubs.
And I think it's really important that we talk about the operational success that is the guided bus at the moment, because obviously the county council are in a very, very difficult position over the guided bus at the moment, because they've just pleaded guilty to some health and safety failures, which contributed apparently to the deaths of 3 people, and that is very, very sad. But I'm sure the county council will move on from it. But it is worth it because of that. It's important to stress the guided bus, from my perspective, is safe, and it also, it's operationally a huge success.
I mean, yeah, and we should probably come back onto that next time when it's running. The interesting is the 10-minute frequency is really important, because that's when people start. Certainly, this is true for things like the tube, metro rail systems, and I'm guessing it's true for the buses. When you get to a 10-minute frequency, people just turn up and wait. If it's more than that, people check the timetables, and that psychological difference is actually really important. When the frequency is enough that you don't have to think about a timetable, you just rock up and you're happy to wait. That's actually that makes a big difference to ridership. Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much. We will see you same time, 7:30 ish, same place next week. Don't touch that dial, or similar anachronistic sayings. Take care, everyone, and have a great weekend. Bye.
Cheers all.
Bye.